My mother spent 6 months preparing me for my wedding day. But she never told me about that night. Everyone seemed comfortable. Everyone seemed confident. Everyone except me. Because nobody told me either. My mother spent 6 months preparing me for my wedding day. She taught me how to fold linens properly, how to greet guests, how to keep a house clean, how to bake enough bread for a large family, how to serve my husband respectfully, how to smile when people congratulated me, how to stand beside him during the ceremony, how to become a wife. Or at least, that's what I thought.
Because on the morning of my wedding, my mother looked at me and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. She adjusted the collar of my dress, smoothed a wrinkle from my sleeve. Then she whispered, "You'll be fine." That was all. No warning, no explanation, no conversation, nothing. Years later, I realized those 3 words were not reassurance, they were avoidance. Because there was one thing every married Amish woman around me seemed to understand, and somehow, I didn't. My name is Sarah. I grew up Old Order Amish in a small farming community where everyone knew everyone else's business. Our lives followed patterns, rules, expectations, traditions. Most of those traditions were never written down. You simply learned them. Or, more accurately, you were expected to learn them without asking questions, especially if you were a girl. The women taught us many things, but there were also things they never discussed, topics that disappeared the moment they entered a room, questions that caused uncomfortable silence, subjects that made mothers suddenly busy with chores. As a child, I didn't notice. As a teenager, I started noticing. But by then, nobody was willing to explain. I was 17 when I became engaged. Suddenly, everything changed. Women who had barely spoken to me before began offering advice. Some taught me recipes. Others taught me housekeeping tricks. A few shared stories about marriage, but there was always a line they never crossed. Whenever conversations drifted too close to certain subjects, someone changed the topic. Someone laughed nervously. Someone stood up and left. At first I thought it was strange. Then I started paying attention. I noticed married women exchanging looks, little glances, tiny expressions, as if they all shared a secret I wasn't supposed to know yet. One afternoon I finally asked my mother, "What was your wedding night like?" The room became silent. She stopped peeling potatoes, didn't answer immediately. Then she simply said, "Every marriage is different." And that was the end of the conversation. At the time, I accepted it. Now I know she wasn't answering my question. She was avoiding it. As the wedding grew closer, my anxiety grew with it. Not because I doubted my future husband. He was considered a good man, hardworking, respected, quiet. Everyone approved of the match. That was the problem. Everyone seemed comfortable. Everyone seemed confident. Everyone except me. I felt like someone preparing for an exam without knowing the subject. People kept telling me I was ready, but nobody explained why, or ready for what. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if every bride felt this uncertainty, wondering if everyone else secretly knew something I didn't, wondering if I was the only one pretending to understand. Years later, I learned something painful. Most of the women around me had felt exactly the same way, but nobody talked about it, because silence had become tradition. The wedding morning arrived, cold and gray. Before sunrise, the house was already full. Relatives, neighbors, friends, everyone moving with purpose, everyone focused on details. My dress hung carefully near the window. My mother helped me put it on. For a moment, it felt like when I was a little girl, just the 2 of us. I wanted to ask her again. I almost did. The question sat in my throat, waiting. But when I looked at her face, something stopped me. There was sadness there, a sadness I couldn't understand at the time. Instead, I remained silent, and so did she. Looking back, that silence said more than any conversation ever could. There was one thing I remember clearly: a small folded piece of paper. An older married woman slipped it into my hand before the ceremony. Nobody saw her do it. At least, I don't think they did. She squeezed my fingers, looked directly into my eyes, then walked away. I unfolded it later. There were only 4 words written on it. Be patient with yourself. That confused me. At 17, I couldn't understand why someone would write that on a bride's wedding day. Years later, I understood. It wasn't advice about marriage. It wasn't advice about my husband. It was advice about fear. The ceremony itself passed like a dream. Hours of greetings, smiles, food, laughter, photographs, handshakes. Everything everyone expected. The entire community celebrated, and I played my role perfectly. Inside, however, I felt something different. A growing awareness. The feeling that a door was slowly closing behind me, not because marriage was bad, not because I regretted my decision, but because I was stepping into a new life without a map. Everyone kept congratulating me. Nobody asked if I was afraid. Nobody asked if I understood. Nobody asked what questions remained unanswered. Perhaps because they assumed someone else already had. As evening arrived, the celebration ended. The crowds disappeared, the noise faded. For the first time all day, I found myself alone with my thoughts. The ride to our new home felt longer than it actually was. I stared through the window, watching darkness settle over the fields. My husband tried making conversation. I answered politely, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about my mother, about the unanswered questions, about the folded note, about the strange looks women had exchanged for months. The closer we came to the house, the heavier my chest felt. I didn't understand why. Only that something inside me knew I was crossing a threshold. What happened that night is not what most people imagine. The truth is far less dramatic and far more important. The real story wasn't about a single moment. It was about preparation, or rather, the lack of it. For years, I had been taught how to obey, how to serve, how to work, how to sacrifice, how to be useful. But nobody had taught me how to process fear. Nobody taught me how to ask difficult questions. Nobody taught me that uncertainty was normal. Nobody taught me that confusion didn't mean failure. And because nobody taught me, I believed something was wrong with me. That belief followed me for years. After I became married, something strange happened. Women started speaking differently around me. Suddenly, subjects that had always been forbidden became acceptable. Not openly, not directly, but enough. Little comments, small conversations, quiet admissions. One by one, I discovered something shocking. Almost every woman I knew had entered marriage carrying the same fears, the same confusion, the same unanswered questions. Some had cried alone. Some had felt terrified. Some had felt completely unprepared. And every one of them thought they were alone. Because silence convinced each generation they were the only one. Several years later, I finally asked my mother again. This time I was older, married, more confident. I asked her why she never told me what I needed to know. For a long moment she said nothing, then tears filled her eyes. That was the first time I had ever seen her cry over the subject. Finally she answered, "Because nobody told me either." Those words changed everything. For years I believed my mother had chosen silence. Now I realized silence had chosen her. She inherited it, just like countless women before her. What I had interpreted as indifference was actually fear. Fear of discussing things she herself had never been allowed to discuss. Fear of breaking traditions she didn't create. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being judged. For the first time, I saw her differently. Not as someone who failed me, but as someone who had also been failed. The older I became, the more I understood that the problem wasn't one mother, or one family, or one community. The problem was the belief that silence protects people. It doesn't. Silence protects discomfort. Silence protects tradition. Silence protects difficult conversations from happening. But it rarely protects the people who need answers. Questions don't disappear when they're ignored. They simply become private fears. And private fears grow larger in the dark. If I could speak to my 17-year-old self today, I would tell her something nobody told me. I would tell her fear is not weakness. Questions are not rebellion. Confusion is not failure. You do not become prepared by pretending to understand. You become prepared by learning, by asking, by listening, by speaking honestly, and most importantly, by realizing you are not alone. My mother prepared my dress perfectly. She made sure every stitch was right, every button secure, every detail beautiful. But there was one thing neither of us understood back then. The most important preparation isn't for the ceremony. It isn't for the photographs. It isn't for the guests. It's for the conversations people are afraid to have. The conversations that can spare someone years of unnecessary fear. My mother couldn't give me those conversations, not because she didn't love me, but because nobody had given them to her. And perhaps that's the saddest part of all. The women who remain silent are often carrying the same unanswered questions they inherited long ago. The cycle continues, until someone finally speaks. And perhaps that's why I'm telling this story now. Because if silence can be passed down through generations, maybe understanding can be passed down too. If this story touched you, or if you've ever experienced a moment when the people around you assumed you understood something you didn't, share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoy thoughtful documentary stories about hidden traditions, family expectations, faith, identity, and the untold experiences of Amish women, subscribe to Beyond the Bonnet. Until next time, thank you for listening.